Hi there, this is a bite-sized Excel masterclass to teach you how to set up a basic template with some drop-down boxes and some conditional formatting. These are often used for asking people to fill in information, to try and standardize responses, and hopefully make it easier to get a consistent format of input into your project when working with other teams. What I've done is I've laid out a very simple kind of list here, looking at 5 projects, trying to give some information about what lifecycle stage they're at using a basic DMake project lifecycle, and also get some RAG status on these projects. This could be sent out simply as a flat file like this, but I guess the idea is that we may get situations where people just fill in life cycles using different methodologies, or not responding in the standard way that allows you to compare across all 5 projects where they're at. Okay, so easy way to get around that kind of problem is to have a drop down box that will let them pick from a list, and a controlled list of what kind of responses you're looking for. Okay. For both the RAG status and the lifecycle stage, I've laid out lists here which show the options. Okay, so we'll start off with a simple RAG status drop-down box. Where this lives in Excel is actually as a data validation technique, because what we're really doing here is we're making sure that the data is from a fixed list. So it lives in the data tab. It's in the data validation option area. And if we apply data validation rule to the cell that we're looking for people to fill in here, that will give us a series of options. Now, in data validation, when completing a worksheet like this, you can set all sorts of restrictions. So, if you want people to only put a date in a box, and also to input that data in a specific format, rather than just writing, next Tuesday or something, you can set that limit. But for this drop-down box example, we're going to use the list parameter, because that's what generates a drop-down box in Excel. So the list parameter, it allows you to ignore blanks, so a blank input is okay, and an in-cell dropdown is what we want here. And then what it asks for is a source. Now, there's 2 ways to deal with this. We can either put in simply a hard-coded list, type in the box what we want the options to be, or we can point to a location on a spreadsheet which contains the information that we want to use. So, first example, I will use a hard-coded list. So let's put in red, comma, amber, comma, green, RAG status. Plain text inputs separated by commas, no quotes or anything needed. And if I click OK, that's put the drop down in the cell. You can see the little arrow here that gives you the options. If I click the arrow, there are the options all laid out as per the data validation parameters that we set. So if I select red, I get red in the box, and that's simply changes the value of the cell to R. I can obviously change it. If I try to manually type in a different input, red for example, I'll get an error message. A user has restricted the values that can be entered into this cell. If I click cancel, it will go back to what it was before. If I click retry, it will then just go back into the cell in edit mode and let me put in what I really meant. Okay, you can actually, in the data validation options for the cell, you can set an error message so that when somebody selects the cell, it says, this is what I want from you in this cell. You can change the error alert as well. I would say that the input message is probably unnecessary, particularly when you've got a large volume of cells. It's going to take people 3 times as long to fill in the template if an input message pops up every time they select a cell. But the error alert can be very useful in explaining what's gone wrong. So if people are typing red into a RAG status box, they might not see a problem with that. But if your error message says, I need an R, an A, or a G, then that clears it up very quickly for them. So that is quite useful to use. Okay, so that's using a hard-coded input. What if we had a longer list and didn't want to type it all out in the box here? Or we wanted to perhaps vary what we're using as the list source. So if I select what's in this box and clear that out, and then instead of hard coding the options, I can click on this button here and then select a series of cells on the worksheet. If I click here, the box will pop back again, and you can see here that Excel's completed a formula. These are absolute references with the $sign, so it won't move depending on where you move this cell with the validation settings to, but it's selected M4 to M6 as the range, which is where my red, amber, green options live. So if I click OK, now my box has red, amber, green options, and I can select those in the same way. It can be very useful just for your own inputs when you're dealing with things where you have a lot of typing to do. You can set up a list with the sets and then just select from a drop down when you're actually completing the options. Okay. Because often you want to set up a template and then hide the options on another sheet. Of course, you can always hide the column, but this can sometimes lead to problems when people are trying to, drag things across or, make larger changes to the worksheet, and you've got hidden columns with things like red, amber, green written in them, hidden away. So a better solution is to put the settings on another worksheet. So if I create another worksheet, and I'll just copy or cut and paste my options to that worksheet. There we go. So this sheet 2 can now be hidden when I'm ready to send the template out, and sheet 1 will just contain the information that I want people to fill in. So the options are still there, and we can go into the data validation box and we can see that this has been updated now and says sheet 2 and the location where that information is stored. Okay. Great. So I'll just do the same thing in the lifecycle stage box. So in this case, I want the data validation to be in a list, and the source, I just roll up the box, is on sheet 2. You can see it completing the formula as I click away, and it's B3 to B7 in this case. Okay. Sometimes it's a good idea to select a longer area with some few blank cells. It doesn't impact the drop-down box too much. There'll just be some empty spaces underneath. You've already got the setting to ignore blank, so blank inputs are okay at the moment for this box. And it gives you some space to add some additional options if you require without having to go in and change the validation settings. But for now, I'll just keep it at the simple demake list. I don't think anybody's going to change that in the near future, so that should be okay for now. Okay. So there we go. We've got on our template, we've got a lifecycle stage box, and we've got a RAG status box. Data validation is a form of formatting, so it's just like coloring in a cell or putting a border around it or something like that. So what we need to do now is drag down and copy that down the column of cells that we're using here. Okay. It will of course also take the value, so the value is measure, but I can just select the ones I've copied down and delete them. The validation settings are still there, so we can still use those settings. Okay, and I'll do the same with the RAG status option. Okay, and we've got the options here still there. A useful feature on the data validation box is that when we select one cell and click into data validation, say we want to make a change, in this case, say that I want to add an extra status to the RAG status. So if I increase the area here, and I'm going to add, say, completed to the project list, so we know when a project's been completed, I can actually tick apply these changes to all of the cells for the same settings. If I tick that, it will tell me which cells it's going to apply it to. Click OK, and it's done, and it's applied that to all the settings. There's a blank space here. I can then go to my lookup area, put in complete as an option, and it's there and ready to use. Okay, great. So that's how to set up a drop-down box and how to use it. Just to kind of add an extra bit of enhancement here, it would be great if we could color in the cells depending on what was selected from the drop-down box. This is where conditional formatting comes into its own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some basic conditional formatting rules to color in the cells in this column E depending on what's been selected from the drop-down box. So if I go to conditional formatting, which is on the Home tab, normally a lot of the conditional formatting rules are based on numerical values, but in this case we want to do something based on a text value, and given some options we want to do something with that value. So we can use the highlight cell rules, and we can use the equal to or text that contains option. We can use text that contains here to make sure we're dealing with text values. So cells that contain the text amber, I'm going to use the built-in yellow fill. Yep, and you can see it previewing there. That looks good. Okay, and then I can set up the same options, highlight cells, text that contains red to a red fill. Okay. Conditional formatting, highlight cells rules, text that contains green. and it uses that green fill. Okay, and then the final one, I will use another fill for complete. So say things are complete. I'm not going to use a red, amber, green. I'm going to use a custom format. And this format cells box will appear. You can change any settings here. You could even change the number format depending on what's been put in. But for this case, we simply want to change the fill of the cell to be a light blue color. That will do. Okay. Okay, so when complete, we use the custom format, and you can see we've already got the preview here. So if I click OK, there we go. That's set up 4 separate conditional formatting rules for what's input in the RAG status column. And if I change an input, it will of course change the formatting. Okay, so that's how you set up drop-down boxes, and also how you use some conditional formatting to color based on those inputs.